All right. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for How to Release Secure Software Faster, a pragmatic real-world example. Manual software threat modeling, secure development, and compliance processes are historically slow and they simply don't scale. This delays software time to market, it negatively impacts organizational competitiveness, and it forces most organizations to limit their threat modeling and secure development practices to just a small number of important applications. However, a new approach to releasing secure software faster, a developer-centric approach, can help both software teams as well as application security teams accelerate their software time to market while managing risk. So today in this webinar, you're going to hear more about what taking a developer-centric approach to software security means, as well as see a real-world example of how development and application security teams at one company have used a developer-centric approach to scalably model software threats and to deliver secure compliant code quickly. So as we begin today, we'll go through just a quick housekeeping slide here. So first of all, you'll receive an email with a link to the slides and a recording to the webinar after today's event. Secondly, please ask questions. We'd love to get your questions. To ask a question, simply type it in the Q&A box and we will make sure your question gets asked and answered during the Q&A session at the end. And last but certainly not least, if you have an idea for a topic you'd like to see us cover in a future webinar, please feel free to share your thoughts. Just shoot us an email at securitycompass.com. Oh, sorry, it looks like there we go, there's the housekeeping. All right, so our speakers today are Drew Coulombe and Kevin Delaney. And Drew and Kevin, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to give yourselves a brief introduction.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Really excited to have a chance to speak with you. I'm Drew Coulombe, the Director of Product Management here at Security Compass. I focus on the SD Elements project. I've been in industry for a very long time now as both a developer and a product manager, now a product leader, strong focus in agile software delivery, and just really excited to kind of talk about our approach to managing security in your organization.
And my name is Kevin Delaney. I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering at Security Compass. I've been with the company for just shy of 8 years. And over that time, I've helped a number of very large Fortune 500 companies, as well as all the way down to the mid-market, kind of transform their SDLC strategy and how they approach building secure software proactively. So looking forward to sharing some of that experience with you today as we get through the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Drew and Kevin. So I'll cover real quick kind of the agenda or the topics at hand today. So, first, Drew and Kevin are going to give you an overview of some of the historical challenges around manual software threat modeling and secure development and compliance processes. And then they're also going to talk about how a new approach provided by SD Elements, a developer-centric threat modeling approach, can address many of these challenges. Drew will also briefly touch on some of the new capabilities we recently delivered in SD Elements 2022.2. Which help bring threat modeling into DevOps by using a consistent and automated process. Following that, Kevin's going to do a demo of kind of what a pragmatic real-world approach really looks like, so you can see exactly how a developer-centric approach to threat modeling helps teams scalably model their software threats and identify countermeasures and deliver secure, compliant code quickly. And finally, we'll end with a Q&A session, so you can hit Drew and Kevin up with any questions that you have, and we'll also suggest some next steps for you to consider. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive in, and I'm going to turn things over to Drew, and he's going to kick off the conversation talking about developer-centric threat modeling.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maureen. So what is developer-centric threat modeling, right? Well, it's a really kind of a way of approaching threat modeling that prioritizes your speed of software development and delivery, right? Without compromising security and compliance. So really kind of think about a way that you can kind of build this into your delivery practice. It's not just a point in time. It's something that you're doing as part of your delivery practice. And really more importantly, it shifts ownership to development teams of this practice, right? And overcomes some of the traditional barriers of lack of knowledge about threat modeling, less, security expertise traditionally in development teams, et cetera. So how do we kind of scale that practice out across your entire delivery organization? All right, next slide, please, Mari. And why should we be doing this, right? Well, there's only so many of you. Look at this chart. This is a study that was conducted in 2021. So for every 100 actual developers, you have about 10 architects and 1 security professional. So how can you scale a practice like threat modeling out across this entire organization? You have to rely on the energy and the resources that are available of actually engaging the development teams themselves in the process, right? And with
Okay.
that, I
Oh,
think we
sorry.
have a poll. Is that right, Maureen? Next up.
We're gonna open it up for a real quick poll here. We're gonna show a poll, and you'll have about maybe 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds to do your answer, and then we'll display the results and kind of talk through those a little bit before we continue on. So just take a quick minute to answer. What is the current state of your software or application threat modeling in your organization? Are you currently doing it? Are you doing it, but only for the most critical software applications in your org? Are you doing like 25%, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75, 75 to 100? Kind of pop in your response, and in about another 10 seconds, and we'll go ahead and display the results. All right, we can go ahead and show the results. Okay, so about 25% say they're not currently threat modeling at all. About 50% are only threat modeling their most critical software. And then the next is threat modeling about 25 or 50% of our software. So I'm going to ask Drew and Kevin, any surprises here? Is this kind of what you expected, a little bit different?
That's pretty on brand with what we see with most customers that we speak to, and I think we'll get into in a little bit of why that is. But no, that's pretty common from what I've seen at least.
All right, reflects the real world state. Any comments from you, Drew? Kind of in line with what you were thinking you'd see as well?
Yeah, that seems like Kevin said, about on par with when we're talking to customers, kind of when they're engaging with us. Yep.
Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead, and Kevin, I think you're going to talk here just a little bit about our approach to threat modeling and threat modeling in general for software applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anybody who's familiar with the threat modeling manifesto, or with maybe even Adam Shostak's approach to threat modeling, a lot of times the whole process around threat modeling is broken down into answering 4 questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job? And whether, no matter what methodology you use to approach your threat model, they all ultimately boil down to these 4 questions, and these are the same objectives and goals that all of these processes share in common. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how our approach to developer-centric threat modeling aims to answer these 4 questions in a way that, as Maureen said, is a lot more scalable and actionable throughout the whole organization. So I want to just advance to the next slide there. The first step being, what are we working on? So information gathering. With a tool like what we offer with SDLM as the developer-centric approach, we aim to gather all of the vital details about the software in a matter of minutes. So learning about the technology stack, the way that the application behaves, its features and functions, the areas and locales that it's deployed in, how it communicates with various components, and all of these things that would have normally been in a more traditional process be done in Excel spreadsheets and whiteboards and meetings. We turn this into a self-serve process that developers are able to go through themselves, and project teams can go through themselves, to provide the context to the system that's going to answer the "what are we working on" question. And that's what's used to start creating that baseline threat model. And then for the second question, that is, what can go wrong? That's where typically the expertise of a security researcher or a security architect is going to be put into play. Now, as we saw on that slide that showed the ratios of security engineers, security architects, developers, there's a lot more developers than the people that can realistically answer these questions if they're doing it manually. So introducing an automation layer where we can start to automatically identify the risks, threats, potential weaknesses, uh, that is going to save an immense amount of time in any threat modeling process, where you're no longer needing to apply that same level of expert analysis to the inputs that are gathered when we're learning what are we working on. This is now something that we're able to leverage automation for. And even going as far as starting to automatically classify applications according to risk, or making sure that they're complying with certain security or compliance policies based on the risk that they represent to the organization. So something that's facing the internet that is handling customer data, for example, can be treated with a different level of rigor than an internal utility that might not be handling anything critical or moving important data. So making sure that we're leveraging automation that's going to allow us to focus on the most critical issues and prioritize that work is one of the most important parts of taking a developer-centric approach. You want to make this as friction-free as possible. And then for the third step, we have, what are we going to do about it? It's one thing to identify what the threats and weaknesses are. And we see a lot of organizations, they draw great threat models and they have great threat modeling exercises. But when it comes to actually introducing the mitigations and countermeasures that are going to prevent those threats from being exploited in the first place, the security teams end up giving their developers a list of headlines. That's the best way to describe them. Headlines. Okay, make sure you prevent SQL injection. Okay, make sure you prevent cross-site scripting. Maybe you're using a new tech stack, a new framework. Maybe it's something that's much more complicated than the OWASP top 10. When developers don't know how to do something, they're going to go to Stack Overflow. They're going to go to Google. They're going to go to YouTube. They're going to spend a whole bunch of time doing it, and they might not even get the right correct answer, or they might use code that might be backdoored or code that you don't have the license for. So supplying the what are we going to do about it? So the countermeasure, specific actionable instruction on how to mitigate that threat is super important to a developer-centric process. If you're not doing this, that's security architect centric. You're just saving them time. We want to save the developers time and we want to arm them with everything they need to do things right the first time. So that's going to include language specific code samples and step-by-step instructions to introducing the correct countermeasures into their app. And that's also sometimes going to come in the form of just-in-time training as well. So instead of just training developers once a year for 60 to 75 minutes, we can take 5-minute micro modules that tells you exactly how to manage sessions properly in Java or .NET, for example. All this goes right into Jira or into whatever issue tracker they use to manage their work so that they never have to go to potentially untrusted sources. So this is super, super important to the developer-centric approach. Another place that traditional, thank you. Another place that traditional threat modeling also tends to fall short is did we do a good enough job? Do we actually have a means of reporting on how well we identified the threats, how well we introduced the countermeasures, besides just code scanning at the end, or besides just a pen test? Are you actually providing ways to validate that the countermeasures and requirements have been implemented successfully? Do you have a way to report on that, not only in the lens of the threats that were identified, but in terms of different compliance regulations? Because there absolutely is an intersection between application security and compliance. Now, a lot of it comes around data privacy and data handling. So do you have a way to kind of unify all of that and not duplicate effort for your developers and not duplicate effort for your security and compliance teams? This is what the developer-centric threat modeling approach affords you. The ability to kind of have that visibility, whether it's on a per project basis or across the organization. This is a very unique capability that organizations that have rolled this out see immense value from. And that's kind of how we map to those 4 questions. You want to just hop over to the next slide there, Maureen? I think Drew is going to be taking it over for the new capabilities coming in the product.
Awesome, thanks, Kevin. So 2022.2 just released about a month ago. So these are kind of hot off the presses and customers are starting to uptake this functionality. The first one I want to talk about today is threat modeling diagrams, right? So traditionally in SD Elements, the workflow would be more around essentially characterizing software through a series of questions kind of presented to developers and then receiving security controls, right? And What we wanted to invest more in with this feature is a more human interface that kind of maps to how developers think about their software, about their architecture, etc., and really give them a method to kind of provoke those conversations, provoke that collaboration with security teams across the business, with prioritization, other development teams, leadership, etc. Let's all look at the same thing. Let's have these conversations about where the risk is in the system and the things that we should be prioritizing. So it's really exciting stuff. You'll get to see an example of in the workflow in the demo later. So moving on to the next one, reusable components. So this is a really interesting object that we've added to our system, right? And it's essentially allows you to characterize a part of your software that you're commonly reusing across your business, right? So we'll commonly hear examples of either like a hardened infrastructure environment, a cloud infrastructure, possibly an authentication service, something that many of your teams are already using. What this allows you to do as a security practitioner is actually kind of characterize that piece of software, that component, with what does a team need to account for and what does a team not need to worry about because it's already been kind of taken care of, right? And this allows you to kind of scale this characterization out across all the different teams that are using SD elements. There have been some other creative uses, such as kind of workflow steps and things like that have been kind of added in using this object as well. And it's really kind of this interesting kind of multi-tool that allows you to scale yourselves more effectively out across the delivery teams. All right, next, please. And advanced reports, right? So we have a tremendous amount of valuable information when a customer is using SD elements that kind of gets gathered across individual projects and how that individual team is doing, scaled all the way up to the entire product portfolio all across your business, right? We can report on, how the most important applications are doing as in regards to risk posture. How do we do compliance reporting? All of these things. There's 1,000 different use cases, kind of slicing and dicing this information and getting it into the right hands, the right people. So everybody has that transparency and visibility on where the priorities should lie and what the next steps are. Right. Next, please. Another big part of our platform is actually integrations, right? And kind of integrating into your software and security practice. The first class of integrations, issue tracking is really about getting the work to environments that developers kind of pick up that work. So common ones like Jira or Rally, etc. Um, this allows us to kind of get the work to the right teams at the right time, etc. Second kind of class are these what we would call verification or commonly known as like scanning integrations, right? Where you can hook up your existing scanning tools to kind of the backstop of SD elements. So you can verify that these tasks have been successfully completed. The organization has successfully kind of taken into account this shift left secure by design methodology and make sure that you're kind of seeing the benefits there. We integrate with CI/CD, infrastructure, and even some compliance solutions. So it really is about kind of fitting into your existing security and development workflow and really getting the right controls, the right people at the right time and kind of verifying those steps. Slide, please. And backing all of this, right, is a really heavy investment in content, right? We have a very well-staffed security research team that is looking out at what these developing needs are in the marketplace for, what are new compliance and regulations coming out? What are new technologies that we're seeing customers uptake, et cetera? So with the .2 release, you see that we added the California Privacy Rights Act, or CPRA, the new NIST 800-218 Secure Software Development Framework, and some tasks around Terraform and configuring Terraform for maximum security and minimizing risk. I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but there is a lot of content. You will be able to see more of this and some more details around this on the full data sheet that is linked there on our website. All right, next slide. All right, and let's talk about the just-in-time training module. So again, this is really about really enabling development, right? Who are not born security experts, right? They're coming in, they're trying to kind of pull these tasks, and they can be kind of like, what's going on? I need some additional context. Well, we provided this enriched experience that we call just-in-time training modules, or JITs for short, and they're really these kind of 5-minute kind of chunks of content that come along with the tasks that are delivered to development to give them a little bit of extra content, a little bit of extra context around, what needs to happen to successfully perform the control, things to consider, etc. And really, it kind of enriches that developer experience. Next slide. All
And
right.
so now, oh, sorry, Drew, for cutting you off. I think we're going to pop up another quick poll as we pass things off to Kevin, and he's going to take you through a demo and kind of show you how all of this comes to life from a developer-centric perspective. But in terms of the poll, take about 20 seconds. The question on the table is, how much time does it currently take for you to threat model a software project or application in your organization? So you may not currently be threat modeling at all. If you are, maybe it takes you an hour. Maybe it takes you more than an hour, but less than a day. It might take you a couple days. It might take you about a week. Maybe it takes you a couple weeks. Maybe it takes you a month, and maybe it even takes you longer than that. But for one application or software project, how long does it take? So give you about another 10 seconds to put your response in. We'll show the response, talk a little bit about it, and then Kevin will dive in with his demo. So 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. There's our results. So it looks like for half of the folks who are on the call, it takes about 2 or 3 days to get a software threat model put in place for an application. And for the other half, it takes about 2 or 3 weeks. So again, I'll flip it back to Drew and Kevin. Any surprises here? Or is this kind of what you were thinking? How representative is this for what you see in your conversations?
It's pretty similar to what I see as well. I think one of the quotes I always use from Adam Shostak, for example, is that threat modeling is an art, not a science, right? There's a lot of different ways to threat model. There's a lot of different approaches. There's different levels of depth that you can go into that you define, okay, I'm done my threat model, for example. And that's going to look different for every organization. Sometimes it's going to be something they can do quickly. Sometimes it's going to be something that they have to go into a lot more depth on, or they have a very in-depth manual process that is what kind of prevents them from getting to that more than 25% number, for example. That's kind of the baseline a lot of organizations have for how many apps they end up covering. So yeah, the ones that take 2 to 3 weeks, especially, that's pretty common. When you have to get people's meetings, you have to get people in a room together with a whiteboard and carve out hours of engineers' time and architects and security folks. Like it's a big task to get that many people collaborating on one thing all at once. So yeah, very much in line with what I've seen and heard. Sometimes even longer than that.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the big surprise that there were no month plus
Yeah.
respondents, because we hear that pretty commonly as well. Yep.
Okay, great. And now I think we'll just turn it over. Kevin, do your show and tell here, and
For
get
sure.
how companies are actually doing this.
Yeah, so we're gonna go through like a pretty quick overview, and I'm gonna show specifically. I want to highlight some of the things that Drew covered as being new to the new release, because I think that'll tie in very nicely with what we want to show here. So I'm going to share my screen, and what you are seeing here is the kind of genesis of a project in SD Elements. When you're looking to first onboard and answer that question, what are we working on? We're going to be presented, for starters, with a survey, which is completely configurable by the end user, by usually our customers' administrators. That's going to ask a number of questions about what is this application that we're working on, how is it composed, what does it do. We're going to see those in just a sec. Now, also keep in mind that this is the survey as it comes out of the box, as it links up to our existing content library. All of our customers do end up adding their own questions. They take some out. They really kind of custom fit this to be what they want to put in front of their engineering teams. But all that said, it's still generally something that only takes about 20 to 30 minutes for somebody with good technical knowledge of a project to fill out. And it's going to ask some questions like, as you can see here, is this a web application? Is this a mobile app? Is this a firmware or embedded device? Is it in a microservices ecosystem? Does it handle financial information? Does it handle health data? Let's say it handles health data, for example, or that it handles payment through another service provider. You'll notice as soon as I click this, PayPal opens up here. So sometimes you're going to have clarifying questions that are going to seek additional context that are, again, helping us answer that, what are we working on? So that what we arrive at in terms of the list of threats and countermeasures out the other side is going to be focused on what is relevant to this project, nothing more and nothing less. We'll ask some questions about the language and framework. Is this a C# app written in .NET, maybe specific .NET technologies? How does it authenticate users? Does it use passwords? Does it generate API tokens? Does it use MyCorp auth, for example? This is one of those examples of a reusable component that Drew just referred to, where we have a hardened corporate authentication system that before this demo, I actually added this survey answer into the survey that is going to indicate that, yes, I'm using this hardened authentication system. And by using that, that means I don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a number of tasks that if I wasn't using MyCorp auth, I would probably have to do manually. But because I am, we're going to see what that looks like in the project as we go through. We'll ask questions about how we authorize and manage sessions. What are the compliance requirements? Are we deploying in a cloud, for example, all those things. But let's assume we've answered the survey to the best of our ability. And now we want to communicate the structure of this app using a diagram. If this is something that your team wants to do, it's not a mandatory part of the process, but if your team wants to use that to kind of communicate, especially if everybody's working remotely, people need some visual help on what the architecture of the system looks like. We actually add the ability where you can draw it from scratch if you really want to, but we've already provided a bunch of context about the application and how it's built in that survey. So we can generate the main components of that diagram in one click here and start drawing our trust boundaries and zones that we might have, how they're going to connect with one another. I can put these in the same zone together, stretch those out, and start building the diagram this way. And in future iterations of this is where we're going to start enabling actual threat kind of identification and tracing on this diagram on a per component level. So that's super exciting stuff that we're going to be working towards very soon. Once you have completed the diagram, you're satisfied with it, you have the option to export it as a PNG if you want. You can export the diagram as a JSON if you want to store it in text form, for example. But for this purpose, we're just going to hit continue to summary. I guess I should save it. That'd be a good idea. And now I spoke earlier about that classification. Our project's classification has changed from unclassified to critical because in the survey, we said we're handling personal data. And that means that at my company, there's a certain minimum bar that has to be met before I'm comfortable with this going to production, before I'm comfortable with my CI/CD tools allowing a production build. And in that case, that's this highest risk policy here. The formula that you use to arrive at that low, medium, high, critical, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, that's totally configurable by the end user. But we really want to automate that decision-making as much as possible. Instead of submitting a SharePoint form or a spreadsheet and letting someone analyze it, break that logic and those rules down into something that can just be calculated, and SD Elements can replicate that for you. Now that we've answered the survey, we've drawn a diagram, we're going to arrive at a list of countermeasures. These are things that our software engineering teams need to be focusing on as they go through the development and architecture of their software. And you'll notice that it's sorted by priority. I said this application was handling health data. Well, one of the most important things we need to focus on is encrypting protected health information in storage. And when I scroll down a little further, you'll notice that some of these are already marked as complete. Now, why is that? Securing the password reset mechanism. Why is that complete? That's something we should be doing for this project. Well, remember, we added that MyCorp auth component. And what that is going to do is, because I don't need to re-implement a password reset mechanism, we're using the corporate authentication for that. We can actually see when we go down to the notes, the activity log, that the reusable component MyCorp auth actually marked this as complete. So we can see that there's an implied completion, or sometimes you can even have an implied incompletion of certain tasks as a result of importing and using a reusable component across the system. So this is very useful. I mean, if the developer does want to go through, reinvent the wheel, re-verify this, they're certainly welcome to do that. But from a traceability perspective, we just want to see that that has been done as a result of the reusable component. Without getting into too much detail on the tasks, these are all individual units of work that developers can follow, including those code samples, including those just-in-time training modules. We'd be happy to kind of show you and walk you through the content in a full demo. For the webinar, I want to kind of show you some of the other things that we've implemented in the new functionality. But suffice to say, the list of tasks and countermeasures that we've just arrived at here is even if you were to go through a manual exercise to get a lot of these, feedback has been from our customers that this is something that would take them often weeks to arrive at, or it's contained in a 200-page PDF that sits on SharePoint that nobody is able to do anything useful with because they're constantly searching for what's important and trying to figure out what's a priority. What do we need to work on first? SD Elements really kind of simplifies and makes this whole approach very developer centric and prioritized to the risk level of the application you're working on. The last item that I wanted to go over is some of the advanced reporting that we've added into the software. As Drew said, we have a wealth of very valuable information about your application security program, almost as much as some CMDBs would have, contained in our database. And previously, we had a lot of customers that were using our API to scrape data out to go into a tool like Tableau, for example. And they were starting to ask us for better in-app analytics to kind of build our own custom dashboards, build our own custom reports that show relevant data that they can use to prove the security or areas for improvement across their organization and different business units. And we've given the ability to do just that. So we have a number of canned reports, or these template reports that you can kind of start with, or you do have the ability to build your own blank one from scratch. I'll show you one of these, for example, the most common problems and weaknesses. If you have a limited budget for training or for education, or you're trying to figure out what the next security lunch and learn topic should be, look no further, because you can actually see, based on all the apps that have been modeled across your organization, which problems and weaknesses are showing up most frequently. And how are they sorted according to their risk rating? So clear text and unencrypted transmission of information is showing up in the most number of applications across the org. Now remember, we didn't scan the application. We didn't scan the code. All of the decisions that we are making to determine the relevance of these problems and weaknesses is based on the metadata that's been provided. How people have answered the what are we working on question. And SD Elements has in turn given us what could go wrong, what are the potential weaknesses. And when we see that high frequency across a number of different applications across the org, we know the things that we can spend a little bit more time on. Why is it important that we focus on privacy violations and use of hard-coded passwords, for example? So this is really easy for us to run at any time. We can export this to CSV. We can run this whenever we want, really, and get instant access to this data. So these are insights that most organizations just simply don't have today. They might have scan results, they might have pen test results, but figuring out relevant threats, weaknesses, and countermeasures at scale is not a capability that most businesses have today. So this is really cool. We're super proud of this reporting that we've done. There's a number of other ones as well. So like most frequently selected survey answers. You're looking to see how many applications across your organization are actually handling that health data, or they might be using a certain JavaScript framework. Very quick and easy way for you to understand where are those survey answers showing up. How are people answering these questions? And because you can add your own questions and answers into SD Elements, you can really use this to gauge any metric at project onboarding and at that initial threat modeling stage. It's very, very useful for a lot of our customers. There's also this ability to just start from scratch. If you've ever used like Power BI or Salesforce reporting or anything that has a built-in detailed BI tool, you're probably familiar with the notions of dimensions and measures. Well, our database is pretty much wide open here. You can pretty much link anything to anything to create visual graphs. You can create tables. You can create charts of pretty much anything you would ever want to look up about your AppSec program and about the threat models that are being created in your organization. You can slice that by business unit. You can slice it by team. You can slice it by framework and language. Really, however you want to do it, we've given you a very powerful tool to do that. And ultimately, once you've created those reports, those are going to roll up to a dashboard, which is your home console. Everybody's familiar with the dashboard approach, where you have the data and the metrics that are most important to you, the things that you want to see front and center, are going to be customizable for you right here. So we can see across different business units how many are compliant with that risk policy. Remember, that's that minimum bar that we said had to be met before the app can go to production. How many are compliant versus non-compliant? How often are activities happening that relate to AppSec inside the business, that relate to the threat models that we've generated? How many of our applications are in a red, yellow, or green state, or task completion, or how we're classifying risk? These are just a few examples of widgets that we've put into a dashboard. But when you think that our entire data model has been exposed through this advanced reporting, the sky is really the limit in terms of creating a visual representation of the metrics that are going to prove the value of your program and prove the current state of application security, besides just a finger to the wind or some Excel spreadsheets that most organizations kind of do today. So this is super exciting stuff. We are actively continuing to iterate and improve on this and bring these new features to our customers that use SD Elements day in and day out. I think I'm going to probably wrap it there. There's obviously a lot more that we can show with the product. I've given you a very condensed kind of 15-minute flavor of kind of what's new and how we walk through the modeling process. But look forward to the opportunity to kind of discussing with you further and showing you a little bit more about what the product can do.
All right, great. Thanks, Kevin. I think we're going to hand the ball back, and Drew is going to chat for just a minute about some of the customers that we have and highlight how they're using SD Elements. And then we'll go ahead. Hold on just a second. So I'll turn it back over here to Drew.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's talk about SD Elements customers a little bit. So we have customers in a wide variety of industries. Here kind of show 17 of the largest banks and financial service companies in North America and Latin America, 13 of the largest technology companies, including software, chip makers, payment processing companies, etc. And we have many customers kind of inside the U.S. government agencies, including members of the DoD, SEC, many other FBI, etc. Customers, and then really numerous other enterprise clients across several other industries such as healthcare, telecom, automotive, retail, and energy. And they really find value in SD Elements, kind of with their unique workflows, their unique products that they're getting out to their customers safely and securely. All right, next slide. Here's some customer quotes from some of the customers that we work with. I was just talking to Jeremy the other day, actually, from FINRA. They're really leveraging SD Elements in a very, very scaled, advanced way at FINRA. It's very exciting to kind of see the things that they're doing with our product. Every development team, every product is being characterized in SD Elements and really thought about security-wise from the very beginning. Having a tremendous amount of success kind of scaling their security practice across their entire business. The quote here, SD Elements enabled FINRA to achieve rapid self-service engagement model to rebuild and scale FINRA's threat modeling capabilities to the entire application portfolio, regardless of the size or complexity of any given application, right? And, from what we saw, in Kevin's demo, they're really kind of getting that insight and that analysis across a very wide swath of development effort. It's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. Of course, Brian from Johnson Controls, improved product security and cost savings. Right, again, it's that scaling. How can we move fast with these teams? How can we get products out to market in a very safe way, kind of working with our development practice, et cetera, not getting in the way, right? Kind of working with it. It's pretty incredible stuff. And then finally, Conrad from Cubic, um, really focusing on how do we kind of build this process with SD elements, really to ensure security is built in from the beginning and really considered at every stage of this process, right? It's not oh yeah, security. It's how do we all partner and collaborate around making sure our products and services are safe for our customers. It's pretty amazing things. Next slide, please. All right, and then I want to take a minute to kind of plug the Forrester study that we recently did. Many companies are experiencing an incredible ROI and a quick payback from SD elements. This is on our website. I won't go into too much depth on this today, but absolutely highly recommend you take the time to kind of check this out after the call when you have some time.
All right, thanks, Drew. And now I think we're going to go ahead and open it up for some Q&A. Give me just a second here to check the panel and do some prioritization. So first question up, it looks like is, Drew or Kevin, not sure which one of you want to handle this, but how does SD Elements identify software threats during the software development process?
Yeah, so kind of as I showed in the demo there, we have a very large library of expert curated content that has some very advanced matching logic under the hood around what are the different characteristics after you've described your software, you've described your application, you've answered that what are we working on question. What are the different characteristics that have to match up in order for certain threats to be considered applicable. And just like any other threat model, somebody is still going to review the results of that and make sure that's indeed accurate. Sometimes they're going to inject things that the survey didn't capture. We see that commonly, but really the logic that is linked up to that survey and everything we use to describe the software to SD elements is really how those threats are identified. And then every threat has associated countermeasures and tasks, which we saw, I showed very briefly one of those tasks, which go right into Jira to make sure that the developers are hardening the software from the outset.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. And next question up is a methodology question, always a good one. What threat modeling methodology does SD Elements use? Like, does it use a Stride or Pasta or something like that?
So it's methodology agnostic. We've kind of taken this approach of developer-centric threat modeling to be very focused on early identification of threats and countermeasures and putting the tools for that in the hands of developers. We do have customers that use SD Elements as part of their Stride methodology, and really, if we're looking to categorize the content that we have in our library in terms of that STRIDE, for example, it's pretty trivial to do that. And most of our customers who've had that need have looked at that and been able to do it pretty simply for their purposes. So yeah, it's definitely a methodology agnostic approach, but I would almost consider developer-centric threat modeling to go somewhere between philosophy and methodology for sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. And next up, where are the software models that SD Elements generates? Where are they stored?
So you do have two options for purchasing SD Elements and deploying it. You do have the option to take it in a single tenant SaaS environment, or you can take it on-prem. So depending on how you want to store and consume that, it's completely up to you. But those are stored within a database that's encrypted at rest, and you're able to you have pretty detailed role-based access control in terms of who's able to access what and modify completed models, things like that.
Okay.
And I was going to say, in addition to that, kind of from the user perspective, they're stored at the project level, which is kind of like, this is the effort that we're going to do this release, etc. So the team kind of does a threat model. And what's really interesting about that is that with the release system and SD Elements, they can come back with the next release of software again at the beginning, take a look at what the delta is, and again do a little bit of threat modeling, which takes much less time since they've already baselined, and kind of move that forward. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Drew, I think you just touched on two things that relate to a couple of other questions we have in the queue. So these next two are probably targeted for you, if you don't mind. So how often are the software threat models SD Elements generates updated? I think you just touched on that a little bit, but maybe explain it a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, basically, as often as the team wants, right? And what we really try to align it with is when they're actually going to be, releasing software or thinking about that kind of time box. Is it every sprint? Do they release every month, et cetera? Do they release every day? And they want to kind of take a longer perspective, right, of how these things, right? So it's very flexible system, but the team is able to keep track of their project through this series of consecutive releases, carrying forward the work that needs to be done. The things that have already been done are off the plate, et cetera. There might be things added because they've added new services, et cetera. So it kind of moves with the team.
Okay, and as a follow-on to that, how long does it take to generate a threat model with SD Elements?
Well, I think as Kevin was kind of mentioning, it varies a little bit, right? So there's kind of two different tasks. One is kind of like baselining, or when you're starting a project for the very first time. That might take a little bit longer, right? You might have a team sit down together and kind of really think through what their approach is going to be, and then kind of fill out the survey. Maybe it takes an hour. Everybody together with deep technical knowledge of the project kind of gets through and kind of does that, right? Maybe a couple hours, something like that. But when we're kind of going into this release system, we expected this to be much quicker, right? They already have a direction, they already have a lot of technologies kind of chosen, and we're really kind of worrying about the delta at that point in the project. So much quicker activity. You could see teams getting through that very quickly, 20, 30 minutes. Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have two remaining questions. So the first one is around threat intelligence library. So what threat intelligence or threat sources or libraries does SD Elements use?
That's a great question. So, I mean, Drew kind of highlighted earlier that we have what I like to call a small army of PhD security researchers, that it's their full-time 9 to 5 job to create, update, and maintain the massive library of content that we have in our product. Some of that is leveraged from the CIS benchmark, especially around cloud and container content. So if you're familiar with CIS or you align to CIS, that's going to be pretty familiar to you. But the rest of it is proprietary research that's been done, that has been both internally and externally vetted, that we maintain those compliance, right, like those regulatory mappings, as well as all of the best practices and information that goes into the product. As I mentioned earlier, you do always have the ability to edit, to change, to add, to remove. You do have full control over how that content does get presented to your internal customers, to your developers and your engineers, for example. And that's kind of the way we approach it. I will also say that our content is all mapped out to the CWE as well from MITRE, so Common Weakness Enumeration. So if you align to certain CWEs to describe software weaknesses that exist in your organization, those mappings will be familiar to you within the product.
Okay, great. And last question is around prioritization. How does SD Elements prioritize the threats identified in the threat models? And how do developers, get that guidance, or how do they really know what to fix first?
Sure. So yeah, it's very much based on that classification system that I walked through briefly. So once we've determined whether an app is low, medium, high, critical, for example, that is going to set the baseline that has to be met for an application to be considered safe or ready to go to production. The priority values are established, that are the opinions of our researchers as a result of the potential impact or damage that could occur by something like that being exploited for most average businesses. You do have the ability to override it if you want. So if you would prefer something to be higher or lower priority, you can certainly do that. But generally speaking, that's the way most customers approach it. And if they have their own prioritization names within Jira, for example, if they use low, medium, high, critical, blocker, for example, you can take our 1 to 10 numbers and you can map those out to however you prioritize things in Jira. So that setup is very, very easy to do, and that's how most of our customers do that.
Okay, and we did just have one final question come in. It's asking, do we provide any type of API support in terms of advanced reporting?
We do, in fact, and customers use advanced reporting both ways, right? And sometimes both ways in the same organization. You saw the version in the interface, but behind the scenes, kind of under the hood of that, right? The entire capability, anything that you can do in the interface is actually backed by an API. So you can get all of this data out into, like Kevin mentioned, a BI system, et cetera, and kind of aggregate. So you can hybrid, you can all in on the interface or all in on an outside system.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Drew and Kevin. Looks like we've gotten through all the questions that came through. And so with that, we'll go ahead and we'll start wrapping things up here. So, thanks, Drew and Kevin, for helping us understand, how this developer-centric approach to security can remove some of those roadblocks and accelerate software releases. And, you also talked on how the diagrams can be used to, automate and improve software threat modeling processes, which is becoming more and more critical all the time, as we've seen in the recent executive order guidance and in other arenas with supply chain threats. So in terms of next steps, if you want to learn more about SD Elements, of course, always feel free to visit our website. We've got lots of resources out there, like case studies and short explainer videos and demos and white papers, all designed to help you learn a little bit more about software threat modeling, previous approaches, current approaches, and what might be the right fit for your organization. In addition, I'm kind of showing here, if you want to learn more about the quantifiable benefits that SD Elements has delivered for real-world organizations, check out a recent report that Forrester did related to SD Elements, where independent Forrester analyst talked to 4 existing SD Elements customers and came up with a report that describes the quantifiable return on investment that these customers received from using SD Elements post-deployment. And then, last but certainly not least, if you want to learn more about SD Elements or see a more customized demo, please feel free to reach out either via the chat box or after the webinar. And one of our Security Compass experts would be more than happy to reach out and contact you. So as we wrap things up here, thanks to all of our attendees who joined us today to see how to release secure software faster using SD Elements. And thanks again to Drew and Kevin for sharing their expertise. And with this, we'll go ahead, and this concludes our webinar today.